When I was little, I was bullied in school a lot, but when I played games, it felt like the place where I could be accepted. It was hard to find a place where I felt like I could belong, and in EverQuest it felt like I found my family there. And at some point I actually was talking more with people in the game than I was talking with people in real life around me. And I actually had my first boyfriend in EverQuest as well. I always loved drawing and writing and making my own characters and stories, but my teachers were always like, you should find a real job, like find something you can make money with. And I didn't realize that you could make a living with working in games. I grew up with my father and brother, and my father and I shared a computer until I was 12, and on that computer we played the same games, so it was an interest that we shared and that we could talk about together. After school I worked as a chef in several restaurants, and I did this for around 5 years. And although I enjoyed it, it was also lonely because I didn't really fit in with the men or the women there. That was when I found the games education in Breda in the Netherlands. When I saw those teachers and I saw that they were still making games but also teaching about games, that was when I realized I can do this for a living, I can do this as my career. This was the first point in my life where I felt like I wasn't the awkward person, because everybody around me was kind of awkward, and that's why we all enjoyed being together. In 2013, that's when I started my games education in Breda. I was surrounded by a lot of guys because it's still like a lot of guys in games, but that's when I met Hannah.
I was practically born telling stories. When I couldn't write yet, I would tell them to my parents, and when I learned to write, I would just never stop writing. Most of my childhood, I was an outcast of some sort, and most of my time was also spent in fictional universes, both my own and other people's. I became a writer because I love stories, and most of the stories that I read never really had people like me as the hero or the sidekick even. So it was up to me to create those. My dad was a programmer. We were, I think, the first in our neighborhood to have a PC. And we would play games together on it, and it just was love at first sight. When I graduated high school, I just didn't really know what to do. What I did was I just went to work, animal shelter, I was a dishwasher at a restaurant, and I spent most of my other time writing. Then my mom sent me a link to this university where they made games, and I never really thought that was something people could do. So yeah, I went there. We went to the open day, and it just felt right. These were my people, this was my place. At first it seemed like I was the only woman there, so when I saw another woman, I immediately went up to her and was like, hey, cool tattoo, and it turned out to be Nathalie. In environments like this, finding another woman is like finding a safe haven. In the first week, we immediately started with game projects, and I ended up being the team leader, while I had no idea what I was doing, and that's when I met Anna.
I was born in a Russian-speaking family in Estonia. Being of Russian descent, I didn't really feel like I fully belonged to the Estonian community, but when I visited Russia, I didn't really feel like I fit in there either. So the thoughts about leaving to work and study abroad were always present in my mind. I never really played with dolls. I only had dragons and monsters. I was rather geeky, and I liked to play on my own. I always loved drawing and painting, but I knew I should strive for something more than traditional art. My father introduced me to games at an early age. We used to spend a lot of time at his office playing StarCraft and Quake. That gave me an idea that maybe one day I can make art for games. At the university, I felt like I need to work super hard so I can prove myself and break into the industry. So after 1 week, I met Hannah, and she was a project lead for our game. I thought she is so cool and she knew everything.
In my last year of university, it was time to find an internship. I played Sanctum back when it came out, so I wrote a letter to the studio that made that game, which is Coffee Stain, and they're in Guvde. And I thought, how do you even say Guvde? Guvde. I had no idea. It turned out that they were actually looking for a UI designer at that time, so it was a perfect match. 1 year later, after I finished my internship, I was hired by Coffee Stain, and I decided to drive here with my 2 cats, and since then I've been here, and it's really good.
I ended up going to France for an internship, but it ended up not being that great. Right at that time, Nathalie contacted me and she told me about her internship and that they were looking for a level designer. I applied immediately and I really hoped that Sweden would turn my luck around, and it did. I felt like I belonged there, like I mattered, so I stayed.
Right after the university, I was hired by a studio in Sweden, though it wasn't in Skövde but in Stockholm. It was good in many ways, but after a few years I felt like it's time to move on, and that's when I got in contact with Coffee Stain through Hannah. I had a really good interview with the management, but what really convinced me to join was when I came to visit the studio and spend some time with Nathalie and Hannah. It felt like a place where I could belong to from the get-go. I have a lot of artistic freedom and creative responsibility.
How can we make a heart with 3? Yes, like this.